One of my favorite memories growing up, and I really do mean this, is playing Wizard101 over the summers and doing a dungeon with my friends over a Skype call. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I've just been reminiscing on good times playing Wizard101. And one question really started coming up when I was thinking about it. And it's a question of what happened to dungeons in Wizard101. Now, right now I'm in Aquila, probably the second to last time they actually put out an expansion that was specifically based around dungeons. The only one more recent than this is the one that happened 10 levels later in Darkmoor and the other dungeons that accompanied it. But I'm here because I still think, to this day, the Tartarus, the last dungeon in Aquila, I still think it's the best example of a dungeon done right in Wizard101. And considering this came out now, like, I want to say like 8 years ago, like, it goes to show that we haven't had something like this in a really, really long time. And there's a lot of reasons on this, so I just wanted to talk about why I think they've gone kind of in a wrong direction when it comes to dungeon making and side content when it comes to what a wizard can do. I think undeniably the biggest reason why we don't see dungeons like Tartarus, like Darkmoor anymore is simply because of the fact that they've been replaced in two ways. One is gauntlets and the other more recently is raids. Let's talk about gauntlets and why I don't think they achieve quite what something like Tartarus, Aquila, or Darkmoor achieve. The thing about gauntlets is that inherently they're not bad. I think the last one, the Nightmare Gauntlet, artistically is probably one of the best things that Wizard101 has ever put out. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend playing through it. But despite all the graphics and all of the cool ambiance and the lighthearted plot even, at the end of the day, it is still the same thing every single time. And what I mean by that is it's doing what every gauntlet has always done. If you play the Nightmare Gauntlet and then do the gauntlet that, we had before that one, we're talking about the gauntlet that drops a Highland gear, you'll notice something very, very obvious and glaring. It's literally the same format. You go through a few minions, I think it's 4 mobs, and then you defeat a boss. It's essentially manufactured to make you stay in there, and it's just tedious enough to make it so repetitive that you don't want to keep doing it. On the contrary, what you'll notice with Darkmoor and Tartarus is that they don't follow that motto whatsoever. You don't have to defeat a bunch of mobs to get to a final boss and keep on doing it for the gear that you want. What ends up happening is you fight a boss in here, the Death Satyr, and then you go through this beautifully textured area that I still think to this day is underappreciated. You end up sailing over the river Styx, and what actually ends up happening is you defeat 2 more extremely unique bosses before you get to the final boss, which was extremely hard at the time to do quickly. I could go on and on about how well done this dungeon is, but at the end of the day, it does something very different than what gauntlets do right now, and it's the fact that you actually have to go against bosses and not mobs in order to get to the boss. And when you introduce that element, immediately what you introduce is, I think, an element where the player feels like their time is respected a little bit more. I know it seems like a very deep thing to say, but I just feel like expecting that the norm is now that you have to defeat 4 mobs with a bunch of AoEs that you use in every other part of the game, expecting that to be a part of the process kind of cheapens the idea of just running a gauntlet to begin with, because that what the purpose of those mob fights are. It's just to slow you down. It's not to actually challenge you in any way, shape, or form, or to enforce communication or incentivize, teamwork. There's none of that. It's just AoE as quickly as you can until you get to the one boss fight that is unique. So while gauntlets graphically can achieve very similar things that dungeons like this do, I think the way they're organized right now, because they need to be short and fit the formula of what a gauntlet really is, because of that, they lose something very important, which is the unique bosses that we know and love from all of these older dungeons. And you'll notice that this is actually true for all of the dungeons that they used to make, including the most iconic one of all, probably Darkmoor. You don't really just fight mobs to get to one boss. You fight multiple bosses that all have unique cheats. Very often these bosses will drop lower tier versions of the gear that you're going for, so casual players still have something to look forward to. It's all very, very well done, and it encourages you to actually work together when you don't just have a mob that you have to fight against. Now, you might say, well, Sauce, we do have an example of a bunch of bosses that you have to fight to get to the final one, and that's what a raid is. To me, the problem is that raids right now, they don't seem to follow a plot whatsoever, so it's kind of hard to look at it like a series of bosses. It looks more like a series of challenges challenges, like puzzles almost, you have to solve. And while I'm more than willing to give them a pass on the first raid because, you know, it was literally the first one, I'm open to see like actual, like, you know, cinematic elements. I'm open to see like bosses that have a purpose, you know. Otherwise it doesn't really feel like Tartarus or Darkmoor. It feels like puzzly. Now there is evidence to believe that they actually are going to go this route with the next raid, which is really, really cool, you know, like dialogue, like actual like roles that the bosses play. That's going to give us a feeling that's going to be much more similar to something that we had 8 years ago. But let's not forget at the end of the day that raids are still very inaccessible for the casual player. I think what these dungeons all have in common and why they get such a good reputation in Wizard101 is because you don't actually have to do any extra work to get into this damn sigil. When you're level 30, you get into this sigil. When you're level 70, after doing that dungeon, you move on to the next one. And then when you're level 90, you move on to the next one. The only limiting factor to accessing one of these dungeons is your level and the fact that you've completed one of the dungeons before it, right? You can't do Atlantia without doing Mount Olympus, but let's be honest, that's not really that crazy. You have to do it one time and you've unlocked the dungeon forever. So while I do think that having raids with characteristics that are shared by like Tartarus and Darkmoor, while I do think that's a great idea, I do think the barrier to entering a raid, whether by design or not, is going to be way too high for it to ever reach the same, like, you know, peak that these dungeons did. I think my biggest issue with this whole scenario is that, frankly, I'm of the opinion that gauntlets are really good for the game. I think they're really, really great in terms of, like, you know, retaining players, making money for Kings out probably. I bet they make a good buck off of that. And I also think raids fulfill a role that's required in an MMORPG. It's a way for casual players to like rise to the goddamn top, and it's a way for there to be a real challenge at the top. There isn't like something where it just like flattens out and everyone's at the same level. But somewhere in the middle should be something that people can access just based on their level alone, and people don't need extremely qualified teams to run it through. That's what these dungeons used to do, and that's what we're missing right now. Now, there's plenty of ways that they could fix this, right? They could make, you know, every time they release a raid, maybe they could make a dungeon equivalent like this with maybe worse drops, but something that more people could access. They could change the pacing and the actual composition of mobs and gauntlets to further make it look like this so that you don't just feel like you're just grinding all the time. And something that I really hope that they consider, at the end of every world, I think we need dungeons that are similar to the length of this and similar to the drops of this. When was the last time we had a final boss in a world that was in a real dungeon with actual, like, you know, a plot, cinematics, dialogue, like, you know, something to reach at the end of all of it? In Caramel, you just go to the end and you'll fight a boss. In Lemuria, sure, the boss fight's unique, but you just fight 8 people. In Novus, the mechanics of the actual fight, really cool, but it's not a real dungeon now, is it? So I feel like in all of the ways that they put out updates in this game, they're missing one thing that really made the game very enjoyable, which is a challenging dungeon that a lot of people could do together with their friends, casual and hardcore. That's something they really need to think about, because otherwise I just feel like something like this, it's like, I feel like they've done so much groundwork in terms of making stuff like this, and to abandon it, I think, would be a real shame. I don't know, y'all. What do you guys think? Am I the only one who feels? I was feeling a little nostalgic today, and I was walking through Aquila, and I was like, damn, bro, those were good times. But let me know. Maybe you had a negative experience with that, and you prefer the way gauntlets, raids, and final boss dungeons are done in Wiz right now. Or maybe you did enjoy these dungeons, but for reasons fully different to what I just said. So at least share those, because I want to look forward to reading all of y'all's comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the state of dungeons in Wizard101. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something. I'll see y'all soon. Stay awesome, y'all. And yeah.